Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to another episode of the Husker Big Red podcast. We're live here on the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. Chris Peterson here once again with Danny Gillette, my co-host from HuskerBigRed.com, and we're going to break down a big recruiting weekend for the Huskers. There's kind of a lot going on with spring ball, and these guys got a chance to take in some practices, and there's a lot of, interviews and intel kind of going out there with recruiting, but Danny, I guess we'll just start first. How are you doing on this Monday morning?
I'm doing good. It's springtime now. It's in theory supposed to be warmer. It's a little cold here, but I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
So, we've been talking about this recruiting weekend. You've been writing about it a lot. I've been writing about it at huskerbigred.com. And I guess what are the takeaways here on Monday, after it has kind of wrapped up? I know Dylan Raiola is kind of the, big topic, and we can kind of get to that in a minute. But just kind of from a broad perspective, what are your takeaways from this weekend?
Well, it seemed like we were able to get a lot of kids on campus, and I know that was the goal anyway. But you know you never know these days. Some kids cancel. Some kids you know back out for whatever reason, and we were able to get a lot of the kids on campus, which I think was big. And then also, from everything I've read, a lot of the recruits felt confident in where Nebraska was headed, and had a positive impression of the program. So I think that can only mean good things down the road too. And you mentioned just a little bit ago off air a crystal ball for Mario Buford. I mean, I think that's something to watch. And I was expecting one or two commitments, but I also understand that this weekend kind of laid the foundation for the 2024 class, and we could see commitments down the road.
Yeah, I think you said it great. This is a weekend to kind of lay the foundation for this class. And, we could still see some commitments out of it. It does seem like, guys don't really do that thing as much where they visit, commit on Sunday. I mean, you used to see that more. That was kind of the final meeting day, and coaches would kind of push for that commitment. And so you kind of watched out for that. It seems like guys, they do the edits, they do these other different things. And so I would see, I'm interested to see if we'll have any, commitment announcements coming up this week, like, hey, I'm going to commit this date, or, just if any of those, if there's any targets, that were on campus that kind of come up with that announcement, I would think that would be a good sign for Nebraska. But, at least a crystal ball in the right direction. And a lot of guys, I think the theme was that this visit exceeded expectations. If you looked at the different interviews with On3 or with 24/7 Sports, Brandon Baker, Nathaniel Frazier, Donovan Raiola said it was a great visit. Gaitlin Bear, a lot of them said those words, exceeded expectations, and a lot of them, it was their first trip to Nebraska. So, like, Brandon Baker and Nathaniel Frazier, these guys are from California. It's going to be important to get these guys back. You're not going to, an elite player like that, you're not going to get him on campus the first time and get a commitment. You mentioned that Brandon Baker, kind of teased some stuff about the spring game. So if you can get one of those guys back for, the spring or an official visit in June, that would be huge. And this kind of sets the table for that. So I think, I know I get that some people might, want to see some commitments right away, but the reality is, this was more of a foundation and kind of a table setter for, the next few months in this class.
And it's definitely good that those California guys are coming back, especially when you consider the programs in the state. I think there's a pretty good USC program over there. Uh, and so, I think it's a good thing that a lot of these kids checked out Nebraska for the first time. They came down, and we'll have to see what happens now. I mean, I think, at the very least, Nebraska needed to make a strong impression this weekend, and they did that. And I think that's something, given how this coaching staff was, you know, really got to work 3 months ago, and already you have top tier recruits coming and at least saying positive things about Nebraska. That certainly counts for something and speaks to, kind of the way the staff presents themselves, and you know, not only that, but just how recruits are buying in for the future, and how, and there's a clear goal, a clear plan, and I think recruits are starting to sense that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to me too to see what, the next kind of plan is for Nebraska. They really kind of organized this week, and they brought in other visitors, and I'm sure they'll have some others, kind of come in sporadically here over the next few weeks. But it seems like to me the next kind of big weekend or whatever that they're kind of aiming for is going to be that spring game. They've got Dylan Raiola coming. It sounds like they've got, some others coming for that game
Willis
as well.
McGahee.
Yeah, Willis McGahee. So, I think they're trying to get that weekend kind of geared up. So that could be another opportunity to, build some momentum, and getting these guys on campus this weekend is going to help with that. And I just think, especially with these guys that are, Nebraska kids, it's not as important, but these guys that are from California or Texas or whatever, you got to get them on campus 2 or 3 times, or you're not going to get a commitment from a premier player.
Yeah, and I think it's important because the spring game will be the first time where these recruits get to see all the fans, because it's going to be exciting. Even though it's a spring game, fans are going to come out, obviously, like they always do, and they're going to want to see as much as they can with this new program, and at least be around the football atmosphere. So it's gonna be another big day. This isn't going to be a day where a couple fans show up and wave their pom poms and that's it. I can tell you the stadium is going to be packed, and I think that'll give recruits a chance to see, what it's like on game day in terms of the atmosphere. Because, you hear about it all the time. Oh, Nebraska has the best fans. Nebraska, sells out every Saturday. But it's another thing when you get to experience it.
Yeah, I think it will matter. And even without fans being there, a lot of the guys talked about the fans. And I think that, they get recognized, these recruits on these visits to Nebraska and stuff, more than even they do with other places. I know that happened with Raiola from some reporting that I read. So, I do think that even without kind of seeing that game day atmosphere, these guys know, the passion of this fan base. And that's definitely, I think, going to be a selling point going forward. And that spring game, yeah, not only a chance to see the fans, but to see, the football operation of Matt Rhule. And it's true, these guys have seen more of it than we have. Obviously, they're getting in to take in a full practice and stuff like that, and probably sitting in on some meetings and different things. But it'll be fun to actually see more of a game type atmosphere, and I think that will give those guys a chance to just see what the product's going to look like in the fall a little bit. Obviously, not the full picture, but at least giving us a glimpse of what Matt Rhule is going to have this program looking like next season.
I remember reading an article last year, I think it was, and one of Mickey Joseph's big recruiting points was that to a recruit, you're the only show in town here. There's no pro team. There's no competing on Sundays. There's no split allegiances when it comes to football. Nebraska football is the only show in town. And you kind of get treated like a professional while you play here, and that could be good and that could be bad. But for players who want that challenge, and for players who want to get attention and get noticed and play in a a fun, frenzied in the best way possible environment, I think Nebraska, that's a big selling point too. I really think in that way it could also help them prepare for the next level. Just having that single focus on them, and having that passion from the fans, especially because there is no pro game in town.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point, and it is a good selling point, I think. And it's another reason we've talked about it before, but that NIL should be really strong at Nebraska. And there's been some some weird issues there with Matt Davidson. Not want to get into that too much, but that NIL shouldn't be a problem with this fan base. So that should be a strength going forward.
It
I did
shouldn't
want
be.
to,
It shouldn't
yeah,
be, but
yeah, shouldn't.
anyway.
But I did want to talk a little bit more, now about the big name on campus this weekend. 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola, the number 1 overall prospect in the 24/7 Sports Composite rankings for 2024. Was at Georgia last weekend, USC a couple weeks ago. I did read, it was either him or his dad. I think his dad talked to Steve Wiltfong, but it said it was a great visit. And, basically that Coach Rhule's message was, we're going to win here and we're going to win right away. So come be part of this, be part of this program. And so I don't know. What do you feel about Dylan Raiola coming out of this weekend?
I mean, I feel the same as I did. I still think Nebraska has a good shot, but I mean, it's going to be hard to compete with Georgia and, USC, I think, and then Oregon is still in there somewhere. So I feel about the same. I don't feel any worse. I don't feel any better. I mean, I'm just, there is a big selling point to the fact that, he could change the program around like that. He could change it overnight. And not just him, but the people who want to play with him and the people who he can, help bring in. Because, wide receivers are going to want him to throw the ball to them. And I feel the same. I don't feel any drastically improved odds or anything like that after this weekend. I will say, I saw all sorts of Husker fans feeds with pictures of Dylan Raiola, so he was a celebrity this weekend, and it must have felt pretty cool for him to just kind of be a celebrity for the weekend and for all of these kids. I mean, this is one of the biggest recruiting weekends in recent memory, and I can't imagine you know what the feeling must be like, because Husker fans on social media, they were busy all weekend and happy all weekend and tweeting at players positively. I saw a lot of positive tweets, and there's just this energy around the building right now that we haven't had in quite some time.
Yeah, for sure. It's yeah, fans were really excited and refreshing their Twitter updates a lot. I
I
know a
know I
lot of
was.
fans and were on the message boards and stuff. And there was, Rayola had, Dylan had pictures with, Brandon Baker, and Ryan Wingo was one circulating on Friday night that I know had people probably pretty excited. And those are exciting, possibilities. And I think there is a chance that could happen if they land Raiola. I don't really think, I don't see Nebraska having a great chance with Ryan Wingo unless they land Raiola. That's just my thought on
Yeah.
it. But you never know. I mean, that's the thing about recruiting is you never know. I think one thing that Nebraska did this weekend, in terms of where all these other guys are visiting, Georgia, Oregon, USC, whatever. I think Nebraska showed them like, hey, we have great facilities here. And our facilities, multiple guys mentioned that. Ryan Wingo, I think, was one that it might not have been him. So if I got that wrong, I'm sorry. But one of those guys was saying like, hey, these facilities are really great, and the ones that they're building are going to be, they actually mentioned the new facilities. So, I mean, I think that's something that, they're getting that attention of these recruits saying like, hey, if you come here, you're going to have everything in terms of, all the newest technology and all that type of stuff that you're going to get at Alabama or wherever else. And I do think that Matt Rhule is getting Nebraska into the future in terms of like all of the kind of supplemental staff that he's brought in and the training staff and things like that. So I think it's a much more elite operation under Matt Rhule, just the organization level, and I think it just kind of puts off that attitude of winning more than it did under Scott Frost. Just to be honest.
I mean, not that the bar is set high, but I totally get what you mean. He talked about, Matt Rule did about, wanting, proper nutrition and, having good facilities, making sure the kids are taken care of, and just like small things like that. As a player, that must make you feel good. I mean, knowing that your coach wants what's best for you, and you're not just a number on a field, to kind of just do what you're told and that's it, and that's all the coach thinks of you. Knowing that, the coach wants, proper nutrition for his players, knowing that he wants to like be around them, that he cares about them, that he wants to create this team atmosphere. I think it does mean something to these guys. And, you know, the new facility, I've seen, pictures of it, but from what I've seen is, for what they've done so far is absolutely beautiful. I can't wait. I think I actually saw the renderings, like the computer renderings of it, and man, it's gonna look really, really good.
Yeah, it's going to be a big selling point. And Nebraska has tremendous facilities, and I think they're going to have a lot of they can sell playing time and the chance to build this thing back into a winner. And I think Matt Rhule used a kind of an interesting analogy that I read, I think from Steve Wiltfong, or it might have been Sean Callahan actually, but that he was saying we've had this really nice house, we have one of the nicer houses in the neighborhood, it hasn't been the previous owners basically just didn't upkeep it, didn't take care of it well enough, and that's what we're going to do. And I think that's a good message. And it goes back to that point of exceeding expectations, and I think they did that with a lot of guys. I don't know that they exceeded Dylan Raiola's expectations, just in the sense that he knows more about this program than a lot of these guys because of his dad, and he's made trips to Nebraska in November and then in February, so it's not like a new thing for him. But I still think it's a good sign that he's coming back for the spring game, and the next objective is look to get an official visit. I mean, Georgia has one. He's got 4 more. I don't know that he's going to use all of those. I would be surprised if he used all 5, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I think Nebraska's got to get one of those. And, USC, I think, and Oregon are probably both in the mix too. And like I've always said, I think it's going to come down to that. But even though, Wilt Fong's got his crystal ball on USC, I mean, really, I just don't see a favorite right now. I really don't. I think it's a dead heat. I think people aren't including Oregon enough in it. And yeah, I think Nebraska's right in the middle of it, and that's all that you can ask right now.
Yeah, and Wilfong changes his crystal balls, more than the weather. So I don't know if I necessarily
He
buy
does, yeah.
his crystal ball right now, but no, just kind of cool. You talked about making good impressions and moving the needle. From what I read, Caleb Benning was really impressed, and it was kind of cool. Rashawn Jackson posted a picture on Twitter of him, Damon, Caleb, and Eric Crouch. So it was like Husker history in the future right there. So that was pretty cool to see. And it's kind of always been this way for better or for worse. But I saw several alumni tweeting pictures with recruits this weekend, and it's really cool to see the alumni just kind of embrace this program because I know there was some hesitancy in the beginning, but now I think the alumni are starting to really get behind what Matt Rhule is doing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the alumni, I think, and the former players for sure. And he's done a great job at that. I mean, you've seen a lot of former players at practice. I think Garrett Nelson, even though he didn't come back, he really was complimentary of Matt Rhule in the way that, he treated him like he was one of his players in the lead up to the draft process. So I think that tells you a lot about Matt Rhule and the kind of person that he is. And it goes back to that, it sounds kind of corny, but just having good people and getting the right people in place. And he really believes that and stresses that. And so, I think that's important. Just overall in this, every kid that I've talked to or that I've seen get talked to, Gatelin Bear, Benning, Baker, Frazier, Ryan Wingo, I mean, even Williams, Noir, I mean, all these guys that are big time prospects, it all seems like Nebraska has moved things in the right direction. Now, the caveat to that is almost every visit, if all these guys went and visited, Kansas State, they'd probably all come out, you know what I mean? Like most visits
Yeah,
come out
yeah.
pretty positively, but I do think that Nebraska opened their eyes a little bit. Like this isn't just, some like podunk Midwestern town, like Omaha and Lincoln, these are big places and it doesn't feel, so much like it's not, you're not surrounded by cornfields, I guess is the point.
Yeah, and I think it would be kind of easy to say, oh, they're just, this is just lip service when, talking about these recruits, but you saw what the staff was able to do, you know, just when they got here and the recruiting efforts they, accomplished when they got here. And so I think there is a little bit more to that than lip service. And, it's kind of interesting because Matt Rule, Matt Rule had, Nebraska high school coaches at practice on Thursday. I'm trying to pull up the names right now. He had Glenn Snodgrass, Larry Martin, Walt Olson, and the Lincoln Football Coaches Association president Mark Waller there on Thursday. So he's really embracing the area as well, and it's good to see that because with the talent coming up in 2024 and I think 2025 as well. I mean, having those connections and embracing them and knowing that hey, our program is here. We want to recruit your kids. Having that is also you know must be really good and definitely establishes the pipeline in the state.
Yeah, I think that's a big step forward. And, he thinks really long term, like trying to, I know one of his objectives he's talked about is visiting coaches and doing coaches clinics to help, high school coaches here improve because then the players Nebraska can try to recruit from can improve. And that's just, it's such a, easy concept, but I don't think it's something that you put into practice a lot. And I mean, he did that in Texas. Like even when he was Carolina Panthers head coach, he'd go back and do coaches clinics in, at Texas. And that's the thing for a guy that has never been from Texas. Like you would not know that Matt Rhule's not from Texas because he's beloved there by high school coaches and he's following that same roadmap and that same plan in Nebraska. And I think it's going to pay big dividends on the recruiting trail.
I do too, and it's always good to kind of. I'm not saying he has a safety blanket when he does these things, but that coaches are gonna start looking to the program again, and looking to Matt Rule because there was a point in time last year. I remember reading an article last February, I think it was, and the some Nebraska high school coaches, the Nebraska coaching staff at the time did a tour, and they were talking to some Nebraska high school coaches, and someone said in the article, I forget who it was, but somebody said, if it felt like we had been neglected for so long, and now it's good to see them make the recruiting efforts here. Now Matt Rule's ramped that up, 10 times more. So I don't think Nebraska, in terms of talent, will be ignored much longer in the state.
Yeah, and they did. I mean, Carter Nelson. We should mention he was on campus.
Anyway.
There was a couple of guys, Isaiah, McMorris and David Hall had to. They had some conflicts with 7-on-7 things, and they didn't make it to campus. But doesn't. It's not like they just were like, "Hey, I don't want to come." And those in-state guys, like I said, it's not as big a concern. They could get them back for a different day. They've had different guys visiting for spring practice and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, you still had over 25 guys on campus, a lot of 4-star recruits, a lot of blue chippers, and they really did make some movement. I especially think with Nathaniel Frazier, I think they really have given themselves a good chance there, especially with how much they want to run the ball. And it really seemed like he made a good connection with Matt Rhule, and obviously EJ Barthel's a really strong recruiter. So I feel good about him, and I think at this point it's clear to me that he's the top of the heap when it comes to the running back board.
Kind of a guy that you didn't really think about when we were looking at the 2024 class at the beginning of the year, right? We were looking at all the in-state guys, and then we didn't even think about the California connection and guys out there. But if we were able to land Nathaniel Frazier, that would certainly be a big time talent for this class. And we already have Roger Gradney, and adding Nathaniel Frazier would be another huge piece. And I think the California connection is going to be even more important with USC and UCLA in the conference. They have always had it, but now Nebraska is going to have the opportunity, especially with Tony White's connections in the state, to go out there and recruit even more. So I think establishing a foothold in California would be a smart thing. It might be a little challenging because, again, USC, who says no to USC? But still, I think it's a worthy area to explore, and it's not just shooting blindly in the dark, so to speak, in terms of a recruiting area.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that was interesting too is you saw, guys from Nebraska, Texas. I mean, basically all over the map. Pennsylvania, Kansas. I mean, a bunch of guys from Missouri, where Nebraska's trying to expand things. Arizona, obviously. So really, guys from all over the map. But they're still staying focused on that kind of 500-mile radius from Lincoln, which I think is really smart. But they are recruiting at a national level, and that's when this program is humming, that's what it can do. And that is going to take some winning, but this weekend I think was a really good step in the right direction. I did want to wrap up but today's episode, talk a little bit of spring ball, a little bit of spring football. I know that kind of got hijacked a little bit with the recruiting weekend, but these guys did come in to watch some spring practices. And I was just kind of scrolling through some notes, checking out some things from last week. And I don't know if you saw this, but Husker 24/7 on one of their kind of wrap ups of spring ball, they had a note on the offensive line group, and from left to right, it was the first group was Turner Corcoran, Ethan Piper, Ben Scott, Nordine Nwili, and then Bryce Benhart at right tackle. So I mean, nothing too surprising. Of course, Teddy's been, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce. We've tried to do it, Prajaka.
I think it's
Sorry.
Pajaka. Yeah.
Prajaka. I don't know if that's right. I need to learn how to pronounce his name. But at any rate, Teddy's been getting work at left tackle, but still has the green, kind of contact jersey. So I don't know how much we're really learning from that because but based off that offensive line, if they're going to stick with that, that makes me think that the biggest position battle is going to be left guard between Turner Corcoran and Ethan Piper, because I don't think Turner Corcoran's going to be staying at left tackle.
No, but it did give us an idea of what a potential line could look like. And all things considered, I don't hate that group at all. I think that's a solid group right there. Ben Scott definitely bolsters the group, but I'll be interested to see, what Raiola and Rhule, quite frankly, does with this group, because as much as I like to, criticize them and say, oh, they're awful, and this, that, and the other thing. They haven't really had a good offensive line coach in, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years. So we'll see. I mean, we'll have to see, um, you know, what type of offense this is. Marcus Satterfield kind of, I'm kind of getting the idea that it's going to be a physical running offense. And last year, I noticed, and you noticed this too, because I know we talked about it, they did a little bit better in terms of run blocking. They didn't
Mhm.
necessarily create holes all the time, but they were a little bit solid as a unit in that. So I'm curious to see if Marcus Satterfield's physical offense will kind of play to their strengths here a little bit. And you know, I like that group that you just mentioned, and we'll see how they do because this is a big year for the unit and for Donovan Raiola.
Yeah, I feel good about that group actually because we talked about Ethan Piper played pretty well,
Yeah.
and from that group, I do think he's going to be challenged to start, but at the same time, what I could see happening is Corcoran moving to left guard, which is where he started last year, and then he moved out, to when Teddy got hurt. So it seems like they're going to go with that approach again, and that the one weakness is of course that right tackle spot with Benhart. But look, he started a lot of games in his career, and they just need to get the best football out of him. It's not like they need him to be, all first team like Big Ten. They just need the guy to get out of his stance quicker and play better. And I do think that is possible with better coaching because with offensive line, so much of it is your technique and your footwork and your hand placement, all these little things. And not that Nebraska's getting a new coach, but I just think that with Rhule and some of these other guys, even Ed Foley, they have offensive line experience, so I do think that's going to help. And another thing about that group too, Henry Leptoski's another guy on the interior. Jacob Hood and Gunnar Gatula were both kind of on the right side, so maybe one of those guys could maybe provide some competition there. But one thing that struck my mind, when you mentioned the running game, I don't know if you saw it, but Heinrich Harburg had the touchdown run the other day in practice and was looking pretty good. And I have to say, I would not be disappointed at all to see him, kind of surge forward and be that number two, number three quarterback and kind of jump ahead of everybody else on the depth chart.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that's kind of been forgotten about and kind of buried, but from all indications, he's had a strong spring so far. I know he was talking about a potential position change last week, but that to me is even a good thing because it shows that he wants to be on the field, he wants to be here, and he wants to help out this team. And so, I do take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. He was wearing the green non-contact jersey, so having been on a football team, if you touch the quarterback with a green jersey, you're gonna get screamed at. So, so I don't think anybody was gonna touch the quarterback on that because I saw that nice run play. And but anyway, I think it's gonna be an important spring for him, and I think the spring game, I don't normally put too much stock in it, but I think how the quarterbacks play is gonna during that game is gonna tell a lot because I mean people thought very favorably of Purdy after the spring game, and I did too because he played so well, and he kind of cemented himself into that number two role, and maybe something like that will happen this spring as well, where Harburg kind of separates himself from the bottom tier of the positional unit.
And it's, I mean, even if you are like, Chuba Purdy or one of these guys, spring is one of your chances to get, other schools to notice you too. And that's not to say that he couldn't, eventually win the job here at Nebraska. I mean, he was hurt last year or whatever. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting to see how that hierarchy plays out. And Jeff Sims, so far as looked the part according to everybody that, has kind of observed him. And so that'll be interesting to see, what that will be like. It sounds like that Prince William Amalian and Cameron Leonard have both looked pretty solid in practice. I mean, just like looked the part of college dudes. So I mean, I think that's a good thing on the defensive line because this team needs pass rushers. I mean, there's guys that can do it. I think that have the potential to do it, but I mean, there's nobody on this roster. I don't think that's had more than like 2 or 3 sacks in their career, and probably like Ty Robinson and Hutchmaker are probably like the leading in terms of like the number of sacks from last year because there's just not a lot of sack production to go off this team. So, while there's a lot of promise, that's still a huge question mark, I think, is who's going to emerge to affect the other team's quarterback.
Yeah, and at the same token, how is the secondary going to play? We talked about it a little bit last week, but the secondary is going to play a huge part of this defense as well. And I think Omar Brown was a guy that has been getting good reviews, and guys like that are going to have to step up and play at a high level because the 3-3-5 at his best, you know, can get pressure on the quarterback and make life easier for the secondary. So I'm going to be interested to see, you know, what happens, in terms of schemes and things like that. And, you know, I think it's going to be a very interesting defense. And I think it's the right defense for, Nebraska moving forward, especially in this, Big Ten that's going to welcome USC and UCLA soon. So I think it's going to be a good defense, and I'm just going to be curious to see what kind of, you know, personnel they put there and things like that because they have a lot of athletes on the defense, so that allows you to mix and match.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how they use, Chief Borders and MJ Sherman, and where Ty Robinson is, some of those guys.
Tommy
Yeah,
Hill was back at practice Thursday too, so I
and
mean,
Anthony Grant's back with the team now too, so we should mention that. So that's a good thing, I think, for the offense.
yeah, absolutely. And you talk about a, three-headed monster of Anthony Grant, AJ Allen, and Gabe Irvin. I like that a lot.
Mhm. And then, you actually have, Jeff Sims potentially starting, who can, run, who can be kind of a true dual threat option. And yeah, it does provide some exciting, possibilities, especially then you look at the tight end position, and, Reek Gilbert's looked really good. Thomas Fidoni's looked spectacular. I mean, man, as long as he can just stay healthy, I agree. That guy freaking looks like a first or second round pick,
Yeah,
um,
they look like grown men playing a
yeah,
college game.
they do.
Fedoni does too. He's looked really good, like physically, in
Yeah.
a lot of the videos I've seen. So that's great to see because I really want him to succeed. And you know, uh, you talk about that physical brand of football that Satterfeld wants to employ. I mean, let's hope Gilbert can block because if he connects, he'll probably send an opposing defender across the field. So I
Well,
mean,
and yeah, and coming from Georgia, I mean, it's not
yeah,
like you don't pussyfoot around in that
yeah,
program.
no,
You
no, no,
don't
no.
mess around. So, I feel good about that. And I like Billy. I think Billy Kemp and Josh Fleeks are two names that we're going to hear a
Mm.
lot this season, just because Fleeks knows the offense, and Nebraska just doesn't have those, kind of shifty slot type, receivers, and you kind of need that in a spread offense, and so I think those guys are going to catch a lot of passes. And then on the outside, I think you're going to see, Washington and Betts and Malachi Coleman. And so I really think this offense can be pretty darn good as long as that offensive line can hold up. And so we'll see, but that'll be interesting, with spring ball. I think that's the biggest question, obviously outside of quarterback, is how is this offensive line going to hold up? The numbers aren't huge. I mean, just in terms of how many guys they've got right now. So it'll be interesting to see how they feel about that group, and if there's any kind of supplementing in the transfer portal, because there is a bunch of freshmen coming in too. So that's something to keep in mind.
I'm curious to see how Betts kind of does because when he first got here a couple years ago, he had a ton of speed. He was fast. He was kind of shifty, and he could go from 0 to 100 in 5 seconds. And now he's been away for a little bit, but he's added muscle. He's looked good by all accounts. I'm curious to see if he still has that speed and how he will be able to fit into this offense and because I always thought before he came back he was, one of the missed opportunities for Nebraska football. I didn't think they used him enough, but now that he's back, I'm curious to see what kind of dimensions he'll add to this offense because I think he's a really, really good football player, and I'm happy to have him back.
And think about, Xavier Betts was, I think he was like 121 overall or something
Hmm.
when he came out. And, Malachi Coleman's like 67th overall. I mean, and those guys are both, potentially going to be on the field at the same time this year for Nebraska, and guys that are, 6'3, 6'4 that can run like the wind. And then you add Marcus Washington on the other side, who's 6'3 and is basically a pretty proven, deep threat. I mean, I'm not, he obviously hasn't put up Trey Palmer type numbers, but he's had, over like 300 yards receiving the last couple of years. I mean, he's a set, he's what you're going to get from him.
Good
And
route
then
runner too.
Yeah, and then you add in, Fleeks and Kemp in the slot, and Gilbert and Fedoni at tight end, and then the guys at running back you talked about, the depth at quarterback. Like I feel really good about this offense, at least on paper.
And I feel good. I think it's going to take a little bit longer to come together, but the defense, I do
Mhm.
feel good about. I do feel good about the defense. I think some guys are going to have to step up, but I feel good about the scheme, and I feel good about a guy like Chief Borders. Someone who's albeit a little bit more limited, played in the SEC. Has that type of athleticism, and you hear guys on the defensive side of the ball, they're excited to play, and that's half the battle. Act like you want to be there, show up, and if you're gonna make a mistake, make it at 110 miles an hour. So I'm excited to see this defense too, because I think there's a lot of potential with it, and I think if the players, you know, s- players step up and kind of grow into their roles, I think we could see something really special for both the team and the players themselves.
Yeah, and some nice moves up front. I mean, Hutchmacher's, kind of bulked up to 330. So, I mean, I think you could see him kind of as that nose. And then, you've got Robinson and, Elijah Judy, I think could be, kind of those bookend ends. And, so I like how all of that kind of sets up. And I feel like that would be a really good position for Ty Robinson, a chance for him to, still rush the passer a little bit, but, defend against the run, and he's a big, long type
Yeah.
guy. He probably could. And look, you're probably going to see a lot of times too where Nebraska just has two defensive linemen. I mean, like two defensive tackles, two guys standing up on the edge. Basically like a 4-2-5. So get used to seeing those different types of variations. I don't think you're going to see like straight 3-3-5 on every play. It's going to be varied and you know with different pass rushers. I think at times you're probably only going to see two defensive linemen and two edge guys, two linebackers, and then five defensive backs. I mean, that's the new age of college football. But at the same time, you can turn that into a situation where you've got eight guys up in the box because you can walk up your extra safeties. You can do a lot of different things. So that's what I like about it. I think you can manipulate your personnel to defend the run or defend the pass. So it'll be interesting to see how they line up in the spring game. I think that'll give us our best idea yet. But overall, I just think if you look at, there's experienced players at all three levels coming back. The defensive line, at linebacker, and I'm talking about like multiple starters at every level of the defense. So that's something you obviously have to feel good about. Basically, four starters coming back in the secondary, two at linebacker, and two up front. So I mean, you basically got 8 or 9 guys starting on this defense, and I feel like that's a really good place to begin with, especially considering how they've supplemented that with the transfer portal.
And to be completely honest with you, I think Garrett Nelson would have fit very well on this defense. I wish he came back for one more season. I mean, I heard that he didn't really, test well at the pro day for Nebraska last week, and I'm not going to rag on him or anything. I'm just kind of disappointed. I wish he was back here, and I think one more year would have done him some good in this defense. But you talk about all the returners, and I'm thinking a guy like Robinson. He's a decent pass rusher, but I feel like he can clog the lanes a little bit better. So if they have him playing more of a run defense or just kind of staying home a little bit, I think he could really play well in that role. Because I mean, I know it was a long game and everything, but all I can remember is him getting juked out by Aiden O'Connell, and uh, and we saw kind of the lack of speed he had. He definitely had the physicality, but maybe the lack of speed. So I'm thinking maybe a type of thing where he just fills a lane or two is would be a better fit for him.
Yeah, definitely. I do wish that Garrett Nelson had returned this year. I think it would have been a nice fit for him, but you know, it is what it is. Guys make decisions that they make. I still think that, even though he may not get drafted, I think he's got enough pass rush ability to, get signed somewhere. So we'll see what happens there, but I'm still rooting for the guy.
Oh
Hopefully,
yeah,
he can get his
yeah.
name called on Sunday, or not on Sunday, but to play on Sundays in the NFL. You don't want to get drafted on. There is no draft on on Sunday, so
No,
that's
if you're getting drafted on Sunday, you're signing an undrafted free agent contract.
or
So
you're in like the USFL draft or something. So
I hope not. I think he'll get signed, and Bill Bush has been working with him for the pre-draft process, so it's good to see Bill still hanging around. I hope he gets another job somewhere, Bill Bush, but you know, people will ask why we didn't keep Bill Bush, and I think you just wanted a fresh start um, all around. I think it's good to have Matt Rhule bring in his own guys, and Bill Bush, certainly did a heck of a job with the situation he had to work with last year. So I'm happy to see I think he's doing radio now and helping out Garrett Nelson, so he's staying busy.
Yeah, he's a great coach, and I'm sure he'll get hired as an assistant, or if somebody wants him to be an analyst like he was at Nebraska 2 years ago. But he'll definitely land on his feet. He could have helped this staff, I think, on some
Yeah,
level, but at the same time, you look at like Evan Cooper. I mean, he's a dynamic recruiter, and with defensive coordinator, I mean, I don't think Nebraska could have done better than Tony White, except for that guy from Georgia or whatever that I really wanted, Schumann. But they made some big time hires, and I know some people don't love Garrett McGuire and all that, but I think this is
I
going to
do.
be a really good staff.
I
I do
do.
too. I think he was a great hire. So you know
I think
at
he's
any
going to be
rate.
one of the guys that it's going to leave within a couple of years because another team is going to see him and say, "Hey, we want this guy." And just real
Or
quickly,
or like Satterfield's going to go somewhere, and then he's going to be the next offensive coordinator here, and then he's going to be a head coach somewhere. Like
yeah, I
I
mean,
could see Garrett McGuire being a head coach within the next decade.
you want your coaches to move up and get hired somewhere else. You don't want all of them to to leave or get fired or whatever like we've had before.
Yeah.
So one other thing I'll say too, really quickly, is Ryan Held was at Nebraska practice. I think it was Friday because he sent out a tweet saying, "Thank you, Matt Rhule, for welcoming me and my staff to Nebraska today," or whatever. I just thought that was really cool. Just kind of two eras linking, and Matt Rhule just being welcoming to more Nebraska coaches.
Yeah, it's just it's Matt Rule's kind of the way he does things, but I think he's building this program in the right way. He's doing it the right way on the recruiting trail and on the field. So it's a really exciting time to be a Nebraska fan. So with that, we'll start wrapping up the show. But make sure that you guys, so you don't miss any of our other episodes going forward. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you're a Nebraska fan, or tell other people that you know about our show so that they can become part of it too. Get into the comments section, hit that like button, and let us know what you think about spring ball or Matt Rhule, Dylan Raiola, or whatever. So also check out huskerbigred.com for all of our written content. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.